Hello, and welcome to Warner University's A Healthy and Whole University Community. Warner University is committed to providing an educational environment free from all forms of sex discrimination. The purpose of this training is to make you aware of the various regulations protecting our students and also to assist you with what to do if approached by a student who believes they have been a victim of sexual misconduct. In our training today, you will become familiar with three important terms that have regulations associated to them, and they all have an impact on the Warner University community. The first is the Title IX Act of 1972. The second is the Violence Against Women Act and the SAVE provisions of the Reauthorization Act. And finally, the Clery Act. At Warner University, all people should feel respected, honored, valued, and safe, no matter what. As we begin to look further into these topic areas, please keep this in mind as a reminder. Before we get started a little bit further, I wanted to give you some facts that I find a little bit surprising. Perhaps some of you have heard similar things before, but all of these statistics come directly from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and it's called the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. The first one that I find a little surprising is that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 7 men have been the victim of severe intimate partner violence. Every minute, 24 victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking occur throughout the country, and 73% of rapes are perpetrated by a non-stranger. Even more surprising is only 32% of sexual assaults are reported to the police. And more than 50% of all reported sexual assaults occur within a mile of the victim's residence. Now, given that we have lots of individuals on campus, we want to make sure to take some time to understand the commitment that Warner University has. Warner is committed to providing a Christ-centered community that fosters a safe environment and prohibits all forms of sexual assault, and that includes discrimination and harassment, including sexual assault, sexual harassment, domestic violence, dating violence, stalking, unwelcome sexual advances, any request for sexual favors, and any discrimination based on a person's sex. So we have 4 goals that we're going to walk through when it comes to the Violence Against Women and Clery Acts. These are 2 acts that feature prominently in our training today, so take some time to walk through those. So first of all, the Violence Against Women Act and Clery Acts have 4 specific goals. The first is to prevent domestic violence, sexual assault, and dating violence, as well as stalking on campus. The second goal is to educate the campus community that violence against women is unlawful. The third goal is to coordinate services to victims and survivors in response to any specific incidents. And lastly, giving students, faculty, and staff information on campus security policies and statistics. Many of you may have been familiar with something called the Clery Act. It's the Crime Reporting Statistics Act, and wanted to give you a little bit of background about the Clery Act and sort of where it came from. So this is a real life story. In 1986, Jeannie Clery was raped and murdered in her dorm room by a fellow student in a university on the East Coast of the United States. Jeannie's parents lobbied for better notification of crimes in and around the campuses. And part of the reasoning for that was that they had said that if their daughter had known about the levels of crime and violence that were going on the campus, that she may not have decided to come there. When it was revealed there were over 38 violent crimes recorded at that university in 3 years. So the result was that the Clery Act was passed. And what it does is it requires colleges to provide timely warnings about crimes. It also requires colleges and universities to keep crime statistics and provide an annual security report. Warner University's annual security report may be found on the warner.edu website on the Campus Safety and Security webpage, and it's updated each year. All right, specifically, let's kind of walk through the Clery Act and some things about it. It's the Jean Clery Disclosure of Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Act. It does involve several things. It ensures that schools provide services to survivors of sexual assaults on campus. We mentioned that a little bit briefly earlier. And it further protects against and defines such additional terms as sexual assault, dating violence, domestic violence, and stalking. And as we already spoke about, it requires colleges and universities to keep records and disclose information. That's in a nutshell what the Clery Act does. The next act we want to look at is called the Violence Against Women Act, and it was passed in 1994. And what it did is it provided $1.6 billion to enhance investigation and prosecution of violent crimes perpetrated against women on college campuses and in all areas of life throughout the country. It proposed automatic and mandatory restitution to those convicted of those crimes, and it also allowed for the first time civil redress. In other words, that a victim that was unable to receive justice through a criminal means could also file a civil lawsuit. And another thing that it did is it established the Office on Violence Against Women, which is a group that develops federal policy around issues relating to domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assaults, and stalking. The Clery Act was reauthorized and expanded in 2013, and it gave additional scope to women about what they have available to them if they find themselves the victim of a sexual assault. So we've went through the Clery Act and the Violence Against Women Act. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the act that kind of brings us up to date here, and it's called the Campus SAVE Act. We spoke about Clery, we spoke about the Violence Against Women Act, and this Campus SAVE Act amends both the Clery Act as well as the Sexual Assault Victims Bill of Rights that is a portion of the Violence Against Women Act. This Campus SAVE Act was enacted on March 7, 2013, and it now continues to have further implications with regard to reporting for college campuses. So it expands the Clery Act of crime reporting, and it now includes new categories such as domestic violence, dating violence, and stalking. And it requires colleges and universities to expand policies and protections for students, as well as requiring training for all students, faculty, and staff. And as you might surmise, that is a portion of why we are here today. Other than the fact that this is the right thing to do, it is also something as a university that Warner is required to do. All right, so let me give you just a question and let's just see how you do. Which act requires the posting of an annual crime statistic? Which act requires the posting of annual crime statistics? Is it the Violence Against Women Act, the Campus SAVE Act, the Clery Act? Which one do you think it is? If you said the Clery Act, you would be correct. All right, next question. Which act amends the Clery Act and requires colleges and universities to expand their policies and train all staff? Is it the Clery Act, the Campus SAVE Act, or the Violence Against Women Act? If you said B, the Campus SAVE Act, you would be correct. And one more. Title IX is only about sex discrimination within athletics. What do you think about that? True or false? If you answered false, you would be absolutely correct. And that's going to lead us into our discussion about Title IX. Title IX prohibits sex discrimination for anyone, regardless of their gender. So here's what the Title IX Act, it's the Title IX of the Education Amendment Acts. It was originally enacted in 1972, and this is what it says. This is pulled directly from the Title IX. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any education program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. So it calls for things like equal treatment and equal opportunity for everyone, regardless of their sex. In compliance with Title IX, Warner University has established policies and procedures for investigating any and all cases of sexual harassment and assault, and is developing campus awareness and education efforts for our community. To help facilitate the investigation and examination of any potential claims of sexual misconduct, the university has established Title IX coordinators to oversee this whole process. The coordinators are listed here on this slide. The first one is Janet Craigmiles, Director of Human Resources. She is the university's Title IX coordinator. And the Deputy Title IX coordinator is Mrs. Dawn Meadows, who is the Vice President for Student Life. Okay, so you might be saying, that's great, we have Title IX coordinators. What am I supposed to do with that information? When should you call a Title IX coordinator? First, if you think you have encountered or you become aware of someone who may have encountered sex discrimination, harassment, sexual assault, or sexual violence. If you learn of a situation where you may believe that an investigation is warranted, it's another reason to call a Title IX coordinator. If you need help handling a situation in which you're indirectly affected, or if you want information about possible remedies or administrative measures to de-escalate or alleviate a difficult situation, or in general, if you have any questions about Warner University's sexual misconduct policy and procedures. Just so you are aware of where to find that, if you go to the university's One Community Drive under University Policies, this policy is cross-listed under Safety and Security and Risk Management, as well as under the Human Resources tab, and it is called the Sexual Misconduct Policy. A couple other pieces of information, just so that you are aware, this comes directly from our policy. Any and all reports of alleged sexual misconduct, harassment, assault, dating, and domestic violence will be addressed. That does not mean in every case a full scope investigation is appropriate, but every incident will be looked into and it will be addressed. And just so that you know, the policy contains a full description of the full complaint and investigative process. So it's something that you should familiarize yourself with. The other thing to know is that in anything regarding any form of Title IX accusations or any incidents that are reported, any form of retaliation by any party involved in a Title IX investigation is absolutely prohibited. We're going to talk about an interesting concept now called bystander intervention and conditional immunity. At a university such as ourselves, as we've already mentioned, we are deeply committed to the safety and well-being of our students, as well as all of our faculty and staff members. Bystander intervention by students can be a critical aspect of enhancing the welfare of their peers. Students are strongly encouraged to contact university personnel or seek professional or medical attention when their health and safety of themselves or other people appears to be at risk. Now, because we have lifestyle goals and standards for our students, it is conceivable that a student might be hesitant to come forward because perhaps in a situation where they or somebody that they are close to has experienced some form of sexual misconduct, that they are concerned about coming forward because they've broken a rule. So, for example, drinking alcoholic beverages on campus or some other college standard or rule that may have been violated um, as a part of this incident that occurred. Now, to encourage reporting, Warner offers what's called conditional immunity related to the particular incident of sexual misconduct, harassment, assault, dating violence, domestic violence, or stalking that is reported. Now, while there may be no specific sanctions for these individuals who do come forward, the university may attempt to provide voluntary offerings of help, accountability, support, and education, depending on the rule or the violation that the campus has that may have been broken. But we never want fear of punishment or fear of reprisal to be a reason why someone doesn't come forward to report sexual misconduct. And again, no barriers. That is the goal here, no barriers to any student who is hesitant to report an incident. And again, that conditional immunity offered to students related to the reporting of that incident. Okay, we're going to move now to just some definitions. First of all, it's helpful to define what is sexual assault. Sexual assault is any unwanted sexual behavior, including kissing and touching. Sexual behavior that happens due to manipulation, coercion, threatening, bullying, or tricking. Sexual behavior that happens when another person cannot give consent, such as they're sleeping, they're intoxicated, or they are mentally and or physically incapacitated in some way. That is the broad definition of sexual assault. Now, you may see as we walk through some of these, there are many similarities between the definitions, but I wanted to make sure to walk you through these particular definitions as they are described within the Warner University Sexual Misconduct Policy. All right, sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is unwanted advances of a sexual nature or any kind of a request for sexual favor. And sexual harassment can also take the form of unwanted exposure to sexually explicit comments, conversations, pictures, videos, or just general office banter. Okay, so that is a definition of sexual harassment. Wanted to look a little bit now at the term dating violence. Dating violence is similar in some ways to domestic violence, but the different Violence Against Women Acts do provide different nuances. So dating violence itself is a pattern of assaultive or controlling behavior that a person uses against somebody else to gain control or maintain power and control in a relationship that is usually of some kind of a romantic or intimate nature. Okay, so some examples of this include things like trying to cut off the victim's relationship with their family and friends, humiliating the victim in front of their friends, using threatening behavior, threatening a physical assault, or using a physical assault threat, or actually physically assaulting someone. Things like hitting, shoving, grabbing, slapping, beating, kicking, touching, or forcing the victim to engage in some form of unwanted sexual activity. Again, a lot in there, but wanted to make sure that we get that complete definition of what dating violence is all about. Very similar is domestic violence. That is the use of physical, sexual, or emotional abuse or threats to control another person who is a current or former spouse or other intimate partner, such as a boyfriend or girlfriend. Again, you will see some very similar examples to dating violence. So some examples of what would domestic violence look like. Causing or attempting to cause physical or mental harm to a partner, to a family or household member, placing a family or household member in fear of their physical safety, engaging in an activity that would cause a reasonable person to feel terrorized, frightened, intimidated, threatened, harassed, or molested. So again, just some more breaking out domestic violence. All right, the last one is stalking. Stalking is a behavior directed at a specific person that would cause a reasonable person to fear for their safety or suffer substantial emotional distress. So acts of stalking, they can include electronic, telephone harassment, social media harassment, being followed, receiving unwanted gifts, or any other form of intrusive behavior that a reasonable person would say, that person has reason to have concern. We talked a little earlier about consent, and really when it comes to Title IX, when it comes to sexual misconduct, when it comes to sexual harassment, any of the definition areas that we've already covered, it is really about consent and it's behavior that is consensual. Now, in saying these things, that does not take away at all from Warner University's standards of the appropriate expression for sexuality within the boundaries of marriage. But from the standpoint of this training, to better understand, it is all about consent, and that is positive agreement, verbally or non-verbally. Some things to remember about consent. Consent can be withdrawn at any time by either party. In current relationships or having a previous encounter with someone or complete silence from the other person does not constitute consent. Consent may not be given by someone who is unconscious, unaware, or unable to communicate. And the use of alcohol and drugs may render a person unable to give consent due to impaired judgment. Unfortunately, in many Title IX events that occur across campuses across the nation, alcohol and drug usage seem to often be a contributing factor, or at least to be somewhat involved in many incidences of sexual misconduct and assault. So always be aware that any use of alcohol or drugs may actually render a person not able to give consent to sexual activity. All right, a couple of questions before we keep going. First question, if a student keeps trying to kiss another student and the affection is unwanted, could this be a case, a potential case of sexual assault? If you said yes, you are absolutely correct. Again, if that is not a guarantee that it is a sexual assault case, but it has the potential and should definitely get your attention, something that probably should be looked into and addressed. All right, the next question. Can a person assume that an extremely intoxicated partner has given consent for sexual activity just because they said yes? And if you were paying attention and answered no, you are absolutely correct. That's what we just spoke about with consent. There may be a point at which a partner, even if they're saying yes, is too intoxicated to legally be able to give that consent. And last question, if a student tells you that her boyfriend won't let her talk to her friends and family, could it be a sign that there is some dating violence in that relationship? And if you answered yes, you would be exactly correct. Again, it doesn't necessarily ensure that there is dating violence in that relationship. Again, but those are warning signs that some type of dating violence could be present. So worth asking some follow-up questions on. All right, so as an employee at Warner University, you may be asking, okay, so what do I do? How do I help a student What happens if a student confides in me that they have been a victim of some form of sexual misconduct? All right. So, of course, the first thing, make sure that a student's not in imminent danger or in need of medical attention. If that is the case, strongly encourage them to call 911 or campus safety and security, or do so yourself. We want to make sure that there is no imminent danger to any student. Second thing is there's going to be a lot of feelings of confusion and guilt, so validate their feelings. If they're feeling scared, if they're feeling angry, if they're feeling violated, help them to validate those feelings. Be patient and don't be judgmental. All right, listen to the student. There's obviously a reason why they have entrusted you with this information, because this is a very, very difficult thing for many people to talk about. Believe the student, okay? Believe that what they're telling you is truthful. Remind them it's never the victim's fault. Be aware of resources, or even better, know where to point the student to obtain more resources. And then realize you and the victim are not alone. This is probably an odd statement for some, but for anybody who has worked with another individual who has gone through a traumatizing event, it is very isolating, and it can be very weighing on you as the hearer of this information. And it can easily translate into you feeling that you're in a bubble, and it's really you and this other individual have got to somehow figure it all out and bear the burdens of all of this information. That is why there are Title IX coordinators here on campus. So contact a Title IX coordinator as soon as possible after a student shares with you this information. Now, a couple of things, some signs that something is wrong with a student. Many of you interact with students on a daily basis, and so you get to know them pretty well, and you can kind of tell when something is going on. But even if you don't know a student well, students sometimes have very difficult time articulating concerns related to their safety. So some signs of a distress in a student are listed here. Some depression, withdrawing behavior, a change in behavior. They were outgoing and now they're introverted. They were introverted and now they're extremely outgoing. Post-traumatic stress, at least evidences of that. Fidgety, jerking movements at any sound. I mean, anything of that nature. And probably another area that will show up is some academic decline. Whereas where they were turning in things now they're not turning things in, or the quality of their work has been diminished. Again, any of these symptoms can be signs of a lot of different things, but with regard to sexual misconduct, these are also some things that can manifest, okay? So it's okay to talk to your students. I always encourage professors, I encourage people who work with the students. If something seems wrong, ask them how they're doing. Hey, how you doing? Let them know it appears that something's bothering them. Hey, you know what? You're usually so cheerful. Looks like you're really burdened with something. Everything okay? Those kinds of questions to students can often open up opportunities for them to talk to you and to get to start down the track of getting help that they need. Let them know that you care. If they don't want to talk to you, and of course that's completely okay, advise them to seek counsel with an RD, a campus counselor, a student life staff member, or any other staff or faculty member they trust. The important thing is they need to know that they are not alone and there are resources there to help them through whatever whatever trouble they are having at the moment. And these guidelines are a whole lot broader than just sexual misconduct, because there can be a lot of other things affecting our students on a daily basis. So these are just some great tips and tricks to be able to help a student who appears to be having some issues. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about confidentiality before we close. One of the things that we all know is that students feel very vulnerable. Anybody feels very vulnerable when they have gone through such a traumatizing event, such as sexual misconduct, sexual assault, Any of these things are very, very disconcerting. And there is a tendency of people to want to say things like, I want to tell you this stuff, but you've got to promise me that you won't tell anybody else. As an agent of Warner University, there are only a couple of ways that we can keep that information in complete confidence, all right? So if a student shares with you that they may be a victim of sexual assault or any other form of sexual misconduct, you should contact a Title IX coordinator. And most importantly, don't promise complete confidentiality to the student. Explain to them that you do need to report this kind of behavior. You can assure the student that the university will be sensitive to their identity. However, there's no guarantee of complete confidentiality. All right. There are only 2 roles within the university where we can have a kind of a complete confidentiality sharing. And there are 2 individuals on campus. The first is our spiritual life director. That person can be told information that does not have to be reported out. It can stay confidential. The other person is currently the dean of faculty, who is currently Mike Sanders. He is also someone that a student can talk to in a confidential manner, and that information does not have to be reported back out. Other than that, if you become aware of any information about a student who has suffered some form of sexual misconduct, you are required to let a Title IX coordinator know. So please be careful before promising any kind of confidentiality to students. Students who start off as I've got something really important to tell you, but you got to promise me you'll never, ever, ever tell anybody. Be very careful about granting that kind of a promise. Okay? If you do have questions about any of the information that you have seen in this training video, I encourage you to contact the Title IX coordinator, Janet Craig Miles, or Dawn Meadows. Either one of them is happy to answer any questions about this training or any questions about Warner's sexual misconduct policy. Thank you very much for being a part of this training, and as an employee of Warner University, I pray that you have a wonderful academic year and that you are better informed about preventing discrimination and sexual violence with regard to Title IX, the Violence Against Women Act, and the Clery Act. Thank you very much.